Welcome everyone to our class on how to learn Torah the Jewish way. Last week we introduced this idea of compression. Those people that deal with computers know about the zip file. So someone might say, well, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have a zip file. How do you know that that concept really exists? So I found, Baruch Hashem, in the Ten Commandments of all places, when Hashem tells Moshe to go up to Har Sinai, what does it say? V'yomer, there it goes, V'yomer Hashem el Moshe, alai el hahara v'hayasham. He says, Hashem says to Moshe, go up to the mountain and stay there, remain there. And I'll give you the tablets of stone, the Torah, and the mitzvahs, asher katafti lahorosam, which I have written to teach you. Now, he comes down with the Ten Commandments. Rashi says like the following in this pasuk. Here it is. All the 613 mitzvahs are included in the Ten Commandments. How about that? That's what Rashi says. So, and then he says, you know, brings Sajah Gon, which is the Gonim to the, excuse me, the generation before the Rishonim of Rashi. But there you see it, and the Mashor makes an analogy, and he wants to. There's a Gemara in Makos that says that various people tried to condense the message even more, you know, David HaMelech, and got it down to one statement that you should trust in Hashem. And the Mashor says there, it's like the Torah is like light that goes through a prism. All the information, again, as the way we're talking about, is condensed in that white light, and then it has to be decompressed into the various colors that we see. That's my interpretation. He just said the light and the prism. But there it is, and anyone who's involved in the learning process, as we're going to talk about it and spell it out, will see that this is how the Torah is expanded. But it's important to understand the Kodesh Baruch Hu took all that information and compressed it into the Torah. When we talk about literary interpretation, it really doesn't matter what you say about the artist's creation, right? If you write the story of Shakespeare, it doesn't matter how you interpret it. You're free to say what you want. But in the Torah, we have to reconstitute the message exactly. Because if we make a mistake in it, as we said, there's very, very horrible consequences, both spiritually and physically. So that's it. We're learning the tools, presenting a very basic introduction to the tools of how this process of decompression is done. So I'm going to skip to where we got to, really. Let's go down here a little. Now, what I'd like to do is a little brief, not very, very deep, but just to get our heads back into it. We mentioned that we're interested in recreating the message of Kodesh Baruch Hu, which means what does he want from us? What does he want us to do here in this world? So the Ramchal, in the books that we've put online, explains that there's the thought a person has, and then he has to put that into words, and then the listener has to recreate that thought. In the yeshiva, Rabbi Goldstein used to call it the word-thought formula. You have an idea, you clothe it in words in such a way that the listener then can recreate your idea. So we're interested in how words communicate ideas. So one of the methods we said was there's a basic logical methods. If I say an all statement that includes a lot of particulars. If I say these are the animals that you eat, it means that there's others that you don't eat. Those are all the mechanics of linguistic communication. And we said that we have to really understand how they work. That's why before we did this class, we have on our site there the Ramchal's books on Tfunos and on logic, just to make sure that we're understanding how words work basically in their fundamental way to communicate ideas. But we said that the Torah has another level of communication which is peculiar to it. In other words, Kadosh Baruch Hu gave Moshe Rabbeinu certain rules to apply, the Shlosh Esrei Midos, that he said, I want you to use these rules specially as keys to open up the Torah text. We said one of those rules was the Gezerah Shava. Now, Gezerah Shava means that two similar words in two different places in the Chumash can move information from one place to the next. So, for instance, when you married your wife, you put a ring on her hand. That ring represents Shava Kesef, the equivalent of money. But how do you know that marriage is done by money? So in the Torah it says, Ki yikach ish isha, when a man shall take a woman, and then when Avram Avinu bought the field for Sarah Imenu, when she was niftar, when she left the world, he gave Ephron, he said to Ephron, Nasati Kesef hasoda kach mimeni. I'm giving you money, take it from me. The word take there and the word take in marriage forms a bridge between these two concepts. And we said, and that's how indeed we learned that the act of marriage is performed with money. We said, of course, these are very, very, this rule of Gezerah Shava is totally limited to what Moshe Rabbeinu received from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No one can do this on his own. And we explained because the word et, for instance, before a direct object in Hebrew, is found throughout the Torah. If we could just move information from one place to the next on the basis of a similar word, then et would just make one big mush of everything in the Torah. So these are a specific rule that was handed down and is only applied with Halacha Moshe B'Sinai. So we explained with this wonderful little chart how the information moved from one place to the next. Okay. We said that the Torah, when it came to damages done by a man sending his animal into another man's field, the person has to pay. The pasuk says, "Ubir b'stei echo," when he destroys another field, "Meitav sedeu meitav karmi yishalom," as we said. The pasuk says that clearly, that you have to pay with the person who owned the animal has to pay with the best of his field or his vineyard. And the Gemara explained to us this word yishalom actually extends itself, this din of meitav, paying with the best of land, to other cases that use the same word, like all the shomrim, the person who watches something for nothing, and here from Shin Regal over to Karen, which said was the horn, meaning the ox goring, and then it moves up from the goring here to man doing a damage and hurting something, and the pain, he has to pay for the pain inflicted, the damage that he did, or if it was rape, he has to pay to the person who he raped, or to the father, whoever, it depends who it is. If it's the father, he has to pay money. And then it says in this pasuk, Kesef no, it says here, the man who slept with this poor girl, he has to give to the father 50 kesef. Titen tat ashiana, opposed to what he oppressed this poor girl. So these two words we said also extend. The word kesef is a bridge from onus over here to mafata and to motzi shemra, and the word nosan in this pasuk, v'nosan ish, is another bridge which extends to two more cases of damage that he has to pay the doctor bills and also has to pay for the person's loss of work. So we see that how this particular rule, which is not a common logical rule, it's a special key, extends a halacha that's in one case to all these other cases. Now, we said that there's common logical rules that allows us to extend, and then there's these special ones that Moshe Rabbeinu received. So once, for instance, we see here that Karen is, the Torah says when an ox gores another ox, the owner of the ox who gored has to pay. So the Gemara is going to explain to us that this is, actually the Mishnah says it's an av. An av means it's a categorical case that represents any time an animal has intent to do damage. Once I understand it's a categorical case with that factor, so then I can now extend it logically to other acts that the animal has, which represent kavan al-hazik, his intent to do damage. So if he pushes with his body negif, or he bites another animal, or he squats on the animal or kicks it, that also gets extended through a logical syllogism, an analogy between the two cases. That's more or less a brief overview where we came to. And then, here I have a little marker indicator where we stopped. So our job here is to, as we said, unpack the information, reconstitute the message. And I've spoken about here in this little list of 6 basic levels of unpacking the information, starting with the Torah, given on Har Sinai, along with the Torah Sheba'al Peh, which was always oral until around until the time of the Tanaim. I think it's 200 in the Common Era about that time. Then they saw that the troubles in Israel were growing so greatly that people were not dedicating their time to learning, and they decided that in order to keep the Torah going, they had to write down the basic form of the oral law, which they did in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote the Mishnah. 200 years later, things deteriorated even more. Romans really gave us a very, very hard time, and then the Gemara was composed. Now, the Mishnah normally talks in terms of cases and laws. The Gemara tells us the source of the Mishnah and tells us what the factors are in the Mishnah creating the laws, and also will show us how to unpack the information by comparing the Mishnah, one Mishnah to the next. So that's Gemara. Excuse me. The next, there's a level in between this, which we mentioned briefly just in the Rashi as we started, which is the period of the Gaonim. The Gaonim concentrated more on writing sort of dictionary texts, explaining words and terms, also philosophical things like Sajugan. But as far as the Gemara is concerned, our next big stage is the Rishonim. The Rishonim, of course, read and were well versed in the Gaonic literatures, of course, with the Torah and the Mishnah Gemara before them, and then they wrote down their commentaries. So we have the big people in that period. We have Rashi and the Tosfos, and then we have in the Sephardic side we have the Rambam in Egypt, and we have the Rashba in Spain, and Nachmanides, the Ramban. These are the big giants of that Rishonic period. After the Rishonim, we have another big move, which was called Poskim. It used to be that the students of Talmud were so well versed in the text that they could understand what the conclusion of the Gemara was. So the Gemara goes through a debating process, and some ideas are brought up and rejected. So the question becomes, what do we do in reality? So the poskim in this level of halacha told us what the conclusions of the Gemara. The first big person to do that was the Rif. Now the Rif, Rev Alfas, he made an abridged version of the Gemara, so to speak. He eliminated all the argumentation and tried to just write down the conclusion of the Gemara. But he did follow the format that the Gemara is in. He just sort of cut out the debates and focused on conclusions. After him, the Rambam made an even more radical step, and he abandoned the format of the Gemara completely, and he writes his Mishnah Torah, where he reorganizes the halacha, all halachas, with including the Gemara and the Gaonim, and of course the Rif and who was before him. Because he abandoned the format of the Gemara, a lot of people disagreed with him at that time. The middle position we see is a person called the Rush. The Rush learned, he really was an Ashkenaz, and as so many rabbis and Jews getting, the government started chasing after him, and he had to leave Europe, and he escaped to Spain. And there he is an interesting bridge between the Ashkenaz and Sephardic styles, put it that way, of learning. The Ashkenaz more involved in pilpul and analysis, and the Sephardic style is more involved in conclusions. Now that's a very broad statement, believe me, so just take it with a grain of salt. But the Rush brought, when he wrote his text, which was a halachic work, what he did was stay on the page of the Gemara and explain the halacha as the Gemara ran, much like the Rif, except with much more pilpul and much more analysis than the Rif. The Rif is more of a summation, and he included the very in-depth learning in the Gemara and how we got to his conclusions. His son was the Tur, Rabbeinu Asher, the Rush's son, was the Tur, and he decided that he would concentrate his Shulchan Aruch, that's the first Shulchan Aruch, the Tur Shulchan Aruch, on four basic areas of Jewish life, and that was marriage, Even Ezra, Choshen Mishpat, laws, Yeridea, all the laws of kashrus. What would I leave out? Choshen Mishpat, Or Chaim, and all the holidays. And he called it the Arbiturim, the four rows. That was an interesting. That was an interesting move, because unlike the Rambam, who wrote about all the halachas, even of the temple, he minimized or narrowed his field down to speaking about the practical halachas that were done after the temple, and what we Jews do nowadays, the holidays, the business transactions, all the laws of marriage and divorce and women, excuse me, and of course, kashrus.
So, does the Rif do that too? Or
no, the Rif was very interesting, because he was the first one to make an abbreviated Gemara. Right. Okay. The Rif took the Gemara as it is and just goes down the page and sort of cuts out all the pilpul, all the interaction, just gets to the conclusion.
And the Rosh as well, he includes Kodshim, things like that?
No. Yes, the Rosh goes through everything, but he is focusing, he's focusing. In other words, just instead of just making a amended text, he shows you more like the Tosfos does what the Peshat in the Gemara is, but he's also focusing on coming to conclusions. Okay, but he's using the Ashkenazic method of pilpul in his text. He explains what he has to say, shows what he has to say, and proves what he has to say. Okay, the Rif doesn't. The Rif just cuts out arguments in the Gemara.
In terms of the scope, they like the Rambam. They cover everything.
Yes.
All the stuff that. Unlike the Torah, in other words, the Torah is the first one to narrow down the scope.
That's right. The Torah is the first one to abandon the scope of the Gemara and just talk about practical realities. And he also writes a new book based on, it's called the Arbitorim, but he doesn't write anything about things which are not applicable to practical law. He's the first one that wrote a practical, when I mean practical, the halachas that we do every day. Okay, is that clear? Now, however, he still has he brings the various Rishonim. He just doesn't come to his conclusion. He'll show you how the various Rishonim hold in the halacha. You see? He'll show you what the Rif, he'll explain to you what the Rif says in the Rush and the Rambam, and then of course sometimes he will come to the conclusions, but sometimes he'll leave it open and he'll say that this is a moot point between these Rishonim. But you know. Came along Yosef Karo and went another step further, and whereas the Tur left open the various possibilities to the halacha, he closed the door and he said, okay, gentlemen, we're going to here hold like the Rambam. Finished. Here we're going to hold like Rabbeinu Tam, let's say. But okay, and that was another closing of the door, so to speak, and narrowing of the door. Now, people didn't like it because he tended, first of all, he picked 3 people to Pesakas Halacha on. The Rif, the Rush, and the Rambam. And he usually went with the majority of those 2 when it came to the halacha. Now, we said the Rif was Reb Alfas, he's a Sfard, and the Rambam is a Sfard, and the Rush is an Ashkenaz that lived in Sfarad. So you see, it was heavily weighted toward the Sephardic opinion. So Rev Moshe Isserles was going to write a whole new Shulchan Aruch along the lines of what the Ashkenazic people hold, which are the Ashkenazic people are in the camp of Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam and the Tosfos. Okay, that's the whole German and French area that the Ashkenazim studied and lived in. So he was going to write a whole new Shulchan Aruch, but then he didn't want there to be 2 halachas in Klal Yisrael. So in the end, he just wrote amendation points to point out what the Ashkenazim hold on Yosef Kairo's Shulchan Aruch. And now most of the people do hold his chumras, but it doesn't really matter. The point is, that's where he, in order to, again, not make a split in Klal Yisrael, so he amended the Shulchan Aruch. Now, after that, we have the people who write on the Shulchan Aruch, like the Shach, the Taz, and they will bring up points. They have, of course, the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah in front of them, but they'll bring up points that are either left out or are seemingly contradictory in the Shulchan Aruch. What I call here the box of the Rosh Yeshivas, really, is the people really, let's say, let's say people like the Vilna Gaon and his followers later came to the Chaim Volozhin and the whole yeshiva system, which moved into Reb Chaim later on, lived maybe 120 years ago, around 120 years ago, and it's the yeshiva system that we have today. And there's various streams in that system, some of them more broad in their analysis, some of them more in-depth in their analysis, but that's what's going on today. And today you have the people who concentrate more on the halachic aspects of things. Big post-scheme like Rebbe Loshev, he should be well, and Rebbe Vadi Yosef. You have other people who are continuing the analysis process. So we see those two trends of lamdanas and halacha going on. And of course, I'm not dealing with the whole musar and the mystical aspect of things, even though that's an important part of the total picture of learning. But we're, as I said, going to focus on the transmission of information Kodesh Baruch Hu to ourselves in the halachic aspect. That means, what does he say for us to do? Okay, that's where we're going to. Now, Be'ezrat Hashem, we're going to give an example where we go through these levels, and we're going to analyze each one, and we're going to see what exactly is added by each level in explaining the text. Now, everything really comes down to the Torah when you talk about mitzvahs from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem told the rabbis to make gezeres, tekanas on the Torah. Even they made two holidays, Purim and Hanukkah. So the rabbis allowed to protect the Torah by adding safeguards. Okay, from the Torah you could carry a match. And they said, no, sir, we don't realize people that don't have that consciousness. No one carries fire anymore. But as far as the Torah is concerned, anyone who's writing on a Torah mitzvah has to show that it's from the Torah. You can't make up Torah mitzvahs. It just doesn't do it. That's a no-no. The Torah itself says no one can add a word or subtract a word. So what we do is we try to show that this is the meaning of the text. How do we do it? We go through these levels, from the Torah, the Mishnah, the Gemara, and we open up the text down to its finest details. So we're going to try in our real class, which means our real. This is an introduction, a rather long introduction, because I wanted to give people who can be at all sorts of levels, a general understanding of what we're doing. But then we're going to go, Be'ezrat Hashem, into a more deeper analysis. We'll watch this law that we just spoke about, Meitav, and we'll see how each level opens up the information, decodes the information for us until we can get down to the practical halacha. Okay, so that basically. Now, here we have a chart of how the information is presented. Now, I mentioned last week also some of the things that I said I'll have to repeat anyway. Doesn't well worth repeating. The Torah itself is the Chumash, made up of these 5 books. Okay, Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Dvarim, and Bamidbar. The method of exposition is a time frame. We said you can organize material a lot of different ways depending upon what your interest is. If I'm interested if I'm a banker, then I want to know how much money people have. If I'm a doctor, I want to know how healthy they are. So depending upon who you are and what your needs, you're going to organize reality in different ways. The Kodesh Baruch Hu, when he organizes the Torah, organizes it on a timeline system. He starts with the creation of the world, goes through some very difficult things that are happening there, you know, with Babel and the flood and Noah, and then he gets to Avram and Yitzhak and Yaakov, and that finishes Shemos, and then we come into the Egyptian experience in the second book. And then we go into Vayikra. We have all the laws of the Levites, and Devarim is all the action that happens in the 40 years in the desert. And finally, Moshe Rabbeinu gives his farewell address to the people in Bamidbar right before we enter into Eretz Yisrael. So it runs on a timeline system. Each book is divided into what we call parshios, sections. And when it comes to the second book, Shemot, so we see that there's 11 sections. We're interested in Mishpatim for our discussion, because in Mishpatim, this law of damage, which includes this idea of mate of Sadehu, with the best of your land, is going to be found. But Mishpatim is also divided into a systematic exposition of laws, which we're going to analyze also. Again, just very briefly, we have laws of man damaging man, whether he kills, Rahmanas murders them, or he steals from them, or steals another man. We have, or he hits a man, or he hits a pregnant woman. These are all man damaging man. Then we have these ancient laws about animals damaging, and we said there's he either damages with his horns, or he damages by eating things or trampling on things, which is Shane and Regal, okay? Or so this is, and there's a lot of halachos which we'll get involved in, and that's this is where man's animals damage. Then the next section talks about a pit that a man digs and causes damage to people, a shore falling into a pit, an animal falling into a pit. Then we have an interesting switch there, which when a man steals an ox, and finally we have when he sets a fire and he burns the property down of his friend. This little section here is going to be dealing with, and more specifically that the rules of Shane Varegel, because that's where this mate of Sadeo comes in. However, this little section continues and talks about what we call Shomrim, the different Shomrim. When you watch something and through your negligence, or the property is damaged, so you didn't directly damage it, you damaged it through a passive lack of protecting it properly. So the Gemara goes through that, and then it goes through Mafateh, the laws of enticing a woman, etc. So we're going to analyze this section, and we're going to do some special work in the deeper levels of our class, Bezrat Hashem. But we see that the Torah itself divides itself into books, and each book is divided into chapters, and each chapter is divided into concepts or mitzvahs, and each mitzvah has its subcategories. So that's a general structure. When we look at the Mishnah, what do we see? Well, we see again this idea of categorization from a general to a particular, but the Mishnah organizes its material in terms of subject and not in terms of time. So, for instance, we'll go through it a little bit. This fourth book called Nezikin will pull together all the Pesukim that deal with damage, no matter where they are in the 5 books. Okay, you have damage also mentioned later on, damage where man damages man damages animal, and Vayikra. So we have other sources there. The Mishnah, instead of dealing with the timeline, exposition, so to speak, of the Torah, then organizes its material in terms of subjects, and it divides the Torah into 6 major subjects. And the way that we can remember that is the first letters spell out the word Zman Nakat. Zion Mem, Nun, Tet. Take your time. Zman, time, Nakat, taking time. Okay, that's the 6, what we call the 6 orders, or the 6 Sidrei Mishnah. That's what's called Shas, the first letters. Sheish Sidrei Mishnah. Now, each one of these Siddurim, each one of these books, are divided into prakim. Prakim means that there's chapters in each one of the books. So, for instance, let's go over and just briefly tell you what these are. Royam talks about all the agricultural laws. Moed talks about all the holidays, Pesach and Shabbos and Erev, and she talks about all the laws concerning women, marriage, divorce, her Kesuva, Yavamas, what happens if a woman dies without children. And the 4th one talks about Nezikin, all the laws of what we call civil law, laws of damages, as we mentioned, whether that means direct damage with a man or his property, or by lack of watching things, or by actively stealing things. And then we have Kachim that talks about all the laws of the temple, and finally Taharos, the laws of purity and impurity, Nida, etc. Each one of these books that we said are broken down into prakim, chapters. So if we take our focus, Nezikin, for example, it's broken into Baba Metzia and Baba Basra. Interesting, these originally were just one big chapter of civil law, and later they were broken into 3 gates. The Baba Kama is the first gate, talking about, as we said, we'll see in a second, excuse me, talking about damages and theft. Baba Metzia, talking about the ownership of objects and conflicts of ownership, and Baba Basra talking about land rights, all sorts of laws about property and neighbors. Then there's Sanhedrin, which is the laws of the judiciarial laws. Makos, what does Sanhedrin do? One of the laws is they have to give Makos, so whip people, and shulas, witnessing is all involved into the judicial process. And then Avodah Zarah, which is one of the principal, let's say, problems that one could have legally, idol worship. Then here is the ethics of the fathers are put in, and Horios. So this is all about the legal system. Now, this first section of Baba Kama, which is called a Masechet, is broken down into, this Baba Kama and Baba Metzia, I didn't say it right. These are all books. Okay, there's 10 of these books, and each one of these books are broken down into chapters. So, for instance, Baba Kama starts off with the most general discussion, which is Arba Avos Nezikin, that there's 4 general categories of damage, and then it talks about the 4. It talks about the regal doing damage, and the pit, and the ox doing damage, laws of Shomrim, doing damage, and theft. Now, when we look at each one of the books, when we look at each one of these chapters, Baba Kama has these 10 chapters. The chapters are then broken down into an explanation of each part of the Gemara breaks down every chapter into an analysis of each part of this Mishnah. So, for instance, the Mishnah starts off with, I didn't say that right. Let me go over that again. Each one of these are books. Okay, Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, Baba Basra. Each one of these books have the following chapters. Avos, Ketzer, Regel, Hamaniach. Each chapter then will be a commentary on the Mishnah, for instance. Here in this Arba Avos broken down into the Arba Avos of the Zikin, and how do you do evaluation for damage. In other words, the main head is broken down into 5 different subcategories. Now, it's to note that the basic method of talking about the subcategory is by speaking about the first important word in that chapter. So, for instance, the reason why the first we refer to the first chapter as Arba Avos, that's because the first Mishnah starts with Arba Avos. But that Mishnah is broken down into a whole set of Mishnahs. Arba Avos, Shum Kesev, right? And we keep using the first significant word to refer to it. Now that shouldn't be unusual for us. If you know the Parsha Shavua, the same system is used. Whereas we call, for instance, the second book we call Shemot. Why? Because it starts off with the Eila Shemot B'nai Yisrael. The Goyim call it Exodus. They give the name of that book according to the content. But we have a Masorah to refer to the books and the chapters, the Parshiot, by the first significant word. And that's continued down through the Mishnah also. So if the first the first Mishnah in Arba Avos, so that chapter is called Arba Avos. The second set of Mishnahs, the second chapter is called Ketzer Regel. So that starts off with Ketzer Regel, so that first significant word becomes the head of that unit. And so too, when we talk about the breakdown of Arba Avos, so it's broken down into Arba Avos, Shum Kesev, Chamei Shum Tamim, and Ma Ben Tamamud, and those are Mishnayos, which are the first significant word inside that category. Okay, now each Mishnah then has not every Mishnah has a commentary. But the ones we'll be doing will have comments on this Mishnah here, and goes pretty much line by line, examining each statement in the Mishnah. So, for instance, if we look at the first Mishnah in Baba Kama, which is Arba Avos Nezikin, we'll see that that text is analyzed line by line through a Gemara, through the analysis of the Gemara. So, for instance, it starts off Arba Avos Nezikin. The Gemara says, since the Mishnah says Avos, there must be toldus, there must be derivatives. So, father implies children, and then now it does a deep analysis of what the derivatives are of the Arba Avos. Okay, so at this stage here, the Gemara takes over and starts analyzing line by line each one of these shayas. Okay. Now, here's an example. I'm going to give a very quick example of the type of analysis that goes on in the Gemara. So, the Gemara, our Mishnah says that there's 4 principal types of damages, Arba Avos Nezikin. But Rav Oshia says that there's 13 Avos Nezikin. And Rav Chia says that there's 24 Avos Nezikin. Okay? And again, everything will be spelled out. This is just a very broad overview. The Gemara asks the following question. Both Rav Oshia and Rav Chia use the word Avos. One says that there's 13 Avos, and the other one says 24 Avos. So the Gemara poses the following question. It says, our Mishnah that talks about the Shor Bo Ma Ben Heva, that makes sense to talk about us, because each one of those, whether it's the Shor, the Bo, the Mav, and the Heva, we're going to see have told us. They do have cases. As we said, the case of the the shore Karen, when he gores, is going to have derivatives. You pay only if your animal gores another animal, if he kicks, if he bites, if he sits on the animal. So those are all called toldos, derivatives. But when we analyze the cases of Rev Chi and Rev Oshia, we see that although they agree for our Mishnah, Rev Oshia adds on the cases of 4 shomrim, the guards, plus man, the damager, who has to pay 5 different types of damage. Now, none of these 9 have any tolls. You're either a shomer, chinam, or shoel. You're either guarding something or you're not guarding anything. There's no derivative case. It is the only case of paying for damage in that category. So the use of the word avos of Rev Oshia and Rev Chi, who follows the same example except adds other cases of theft, for instance, or lying witnesses who try to entrap someone by testifying falsely, or all these cases of rape or damaging one's pure food. Okay, excuse me. All these cases mentioned or added by Rev Chia also have no derivatives. For instance, if you have to pay because you cause someone loss of work and you have to pay for that damage, well, there's no other subcategory of that. That is the only category. So the Gemara asks, we can understand why our Tana used the word avos. Let's get back to our text. We can use the word here. We can use the word avos properly when it comes to our text, because our texts do have derivatives, but it was used improperly by Rev Chia and Rev Oshia because the cases that they brought don't have derivatives. So the Gemara says, well, Rev Chia, Rev Oshia told us they are mainihu. Well, there aren't any told us. Well, what could you possibly say? So Rav Avu came along and he said the reason why they use the word avos is to indicate that they have the same din as the Arba, the same law as the Arba Avos. Just like the Arba Avos have to pay, if the man wants to pay with land, he has to pay with the best of his land. In any of these damages, whether it be a shomer or a thief, if he wants to pay back the person who he victimized, he can with land, he has to pay with the best of land. And the way that was done was, and this is the words of the Torah, it comes through a Gzera Shava of Tachas Nasini Yishalom Kesef, those 4 words. Okay. Now, those 4 words, we explained, the Rabbeinu Hananel took those 4 words and spelt out all the ways that this Gezerah Shava moves. Okay. So 4 words of information, you have this whole chart in front of you of 24, and there's 2 other forms of damages here, and actually there's 4 others. We won't get into the details, but there's another 28 cases that are going to have this din of meitav, and that's all expressed through 4 words in the Gemara. Tachas Nasin Yishalom Kesef. So we see again this concept of encoding information in a highly compressed form, and the information can only be decoded or uncompressed through an intimate knowledge of the Chumash and, of course, the Torah Sheba'al Peh. So the Rabbeinu Hananel uses that intimate knowledge and expands those 4 words into its proper and full picture. Okay. Here I just gave an example of how things are broken down in this common, what do we call it when we have these menus up here, you say? Well, now they changed it. Drop-down menus. In the new word, everything is becoming more visual. People like things, like to see things. So, but actually the old type of word was basically, you just wanted to show that this concept of drop-down menus is used to compress information. We have our Mishnah here, and then we have to open up Gemara and et cetera, into its various sections, which I just, okay. Let's go down here. I know I'm talking a lot. You're going to have hands-on activities to do, but right now I just want to give a very broad overview, because I speak to a lot of people, and what I'm trying to communicate here is the integration of the material. There's people who learn Mishnayos, and they learn Mishnah, and they learn Halacha, and they learn Gemara, and every unit is independent. And what the beauty of seeing Torah is seeing the integration. Everything really is coming and flowing from the Torah Shebechtav, the Chumash, the Torah Sheba'al Peh, and outward. It's a little weiter. Now, here I just gave an example of the text that and I added here this concept of visual logic. Visual logic is something that I used to do by taking a scissor and cutting up texts and then pasting them together and holding it up over my head and showing the people that I taught the structure of the thinking. Baruch Hashem, the computer was developed, and that became much easier to do. So by simply taking the digital version of any text and using the Enter key and the Tab key, here I added some arrows, but just in some color, but basically you can begin to see the augmentation process of the Gemara itself, and that's pretty exciting. So here, just as an example, I brought the actual Gemara that just spoke about this Tachnasin Sham Kesef case of Meitav, how we derived it, just as a small example of how the augmentation works. So here is the first text says, Bishlema letana didan, tana minyana lemiyute de Reb Oshia. We can understand our text says Arba Avos Nazikin. Again, a rule. When you're dealing with Mishnayos, a number is always a number of limitation. It comes to exclude other numbers. So we can understand our Tana said there's 4 Arvas and Nazikin to exclude both. To exclude Rev Oshia, who says 13. And the Gemara continues, Rev Oshia, Taminyana, so why did he say that there was 13? They had an extra 9, Avos. That was Lemiyute the Rev Chia, right? So he said that our Tana 4 Avos in the Zikin, then before came 13. And Rev Oshia needed to say 13 to say not 24. Now, what the deep import of that is, we're not going to get into now, okay? Because they're really, in the end, going to, these are all Pesukim in the Torah, they're going to agree that there's actually, 26 here they're going to be talking about. However, why they decided to categorize the way they did is a whole discussion in the Gemara. We're going to leave that. But at least the number, according to our rule, that numbers come to eliminate other cases. So our Tana says 4 to eliminate 13. He says 13 to eliminate 24. But what about Rev Chia? Why does 24? What does that come to eliminate? Okay, so that's the question. Elaminyana the Rev Chia Yutei Mai. What did he come to? I'm listening. Yes.
Is this a general? Is this a general rule in the Gemara that if somebody stipulates a number, that's always to the miyut, it's always to exclude the higher number? I mean, every time it says arba or whatever, it's always like.
Now, the reason for that rule is we're going to learn, again, I can't do everything in 1 or 2 classes, but we're going to learn that the Torah, the Torah never wastes words, and the Chachamim never waste words either. So since the reality is that Rev Osher, Rev Chia are going to be spelling out all their cases, they don't just say that there's 4, there's 13, they actually spell them out. So if you're going to write down Shor, Bor, Mav, and Hever, why do I have to say that there's 4 of them? Just write. The Avos Nezikin, Haim, Shor, Bor, Mav, and Hever. The principal categories of damage is the Shor, Bor, Mav, and Hever. That's all. You don't have to say the number 4. We can count. Again, one of our basic rules that we're going to be emphasizing over and over again, which is the main, I would say the main focus of Darkei Gemara, is the concept of Peshita Mai Kamashmalan. Peshita means it's simple. Things which are simple, which are obvious, do not have to be said. Okay, if I said to you, the sky is blue, you'd look at me, really? What would you think? Of course the sky is blue. What is he trying to tell me? So in the Chumash and in the Mishnayos, and really through all our great rabbis, the words are very, very precise and exacting, and they never repeat anything. So much so as if someone says halacha in the Gemara, and he repeated it, 500 pages before we have another statement of him, the Gemara will say, wait a minute, why did he have to say this twice? So there's never repetition. That's the first rule. So here, it's Peshita. You don't have to tell me this 4 hours. You just told me a Shor, Bor, Mav, and a Hever. I know how to count. That's called Zil Korei Ravu. Go to the kids. They'll count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I know there's 4. You should just say that the categories in Zik are Shor, Bor, Mav, and Hever. Here, 13. I know how to count. No problem. It's we're not, simple people that can't count to 13. And it's only that there's 13. He told each one. He didn't just. He wrote the list. Shor, Bor. Here he said the Arba Avos and the Shohinam, the Shoah. He writes all this out. So the numbers become superfluous. Since the numbers are superfluous, he must have had a reason to say it, and the rule is he said it to eliminate saying more. The other positions. There's 4 and there's not 13. Okay, that's clear?
Yeah.
A rule, whenever you hit a number in the Mishnah, you have to say L'miyutei Mai. The Gemara always does it. Okay, so let's get back.
Also, when
please.
When it says, for example, Shtaim Shehem Arba, what is in Baba Metzia?
In Shabbos. In Shabbos, it says Shtaim Shehem Arba B'fnim. Yeah, there's a lot of Shtaims. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's not to. That's for a different purpose, I guess. That kind of enumeration.
Yeah.
Say that it really is. The 2 is really 4.
Exactly.
If it just enumerates, it just gives you a.
Right.
If it just gives you a straight number, then it's always to exclude a higher number.
Right.
Okay.
And again, we're just talking things in very broad strokes here. I don't want to get into it. It's a that Shtaim Shen Arba, very complex Gemara over there. But okay, in broad strokes, anytime you see something that a child would know, like how to count, or something that was said before, the Gemara always says Peshita. This is obvious. What does it have to be said for? Okay, so here, although the Gemara did not say Peshita, but it's understood. The Gemara also, the difficulty in learning Gemara is because it's called an expert text. What does it mean, an expert text? If you walk into an advanced physics class, you won't understand too much. The teacher will be writing formulas on a blackboard, talking about velocities and all sorts of factors and formulas, and you just sit there, what are you talking about? The Gemara also, although it's written in a language, in a language form, is expert text. It has a meta language underneath it that's driving its questions and is and showing its image and showing its proofs and its disagreements. That meta language is what but what the great rabbis like the Ramchal and Yitzhak Kampenton abstracted for us so we could see the meta language. That means the logical process that's driving what's called a good question, what's called a bad question. How does the system work? That meta language of thinking is what they're all talking about. Okay. Okay. Bekitzer, that's why it's hard to learn Gemara. Okay, it's hard to learn the Gemara because you're talking about experts. Yes, I'm with you.
A rule like this principle about counting, that a number comes to exclude. Is there anybody? I mean, do you find that in the Ramchal, or is there a list of rules like that lists every single rule from beginning to end, that lays out the entire meta language? Is there such a thing? Such a safer?
There's various. Look, the Ramchal talks about the meta language of thinking. He really, all the special rules he doesn't talk about. Okay, he does talk about a kal v'chomer, but in a very basic and prime logical way. The Darkei Gemara talks more about the process that I just told you, this big key of that nothing can be obvious. If it is, then you always have to supply a very good reason why it was said. So this type of, to answer your question, to write down all the rules, different people focused on different sets. The Ramchal is focused on the basic logical rules of thinking. The Yitzhak Kampenton talked about the particular process of learning, which goes beyond the common logical formats. Then you have other people that went through klalim, took every time the Gemara says zeh klal, this is a general rule, and they wrote them all down. So you do, but to one person to write everything, I don't think it exists. There's either people that write about the content, like the Rambam, and reorganize everything. There's people that write about the deep common, let's say, a common logical system like the Ramchal. There's people that talk about the system of the Gemara, like the Gemara process, like special systems like the Yitzhak Kampenton, but no one can write everything. So they focus on parts. That's why you have to learn a lot. And in the end, you have to also learn a lot of content. It's not so simple. There's a lot goes into it. There's a lot. I can't, even myself, I can't talk about everything at one time. So we have to focus and limit our discussion, and then put it together. You know, there says there's 48 ways to acquire Torah in the Mishnayos. 48 ways, you know what I mean? There's 10 levels to get the Ruach HaKodesh. Okay, so it's a big world out there. But we're going to limit ourselves to the basic logical processes that every human being has. Then we have to talk about a case like this where the Torah has a rule where nothing is repeated. I mean, I'm talking about the Dvaday, the Torah, but the Mishnah and the Gemara, nothing is repeated. Everything has meaning. And if you see something that's simple like this, a number, it has to now be a miyut, those special logical rules. And then we're going to see how some of these things happen. But it takes time to get the whole picture down. But here, what the Ramchal did, we're going to see in 1 second. First of all, what the logical, this by using the simple process of really just enter and tab, what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that we can begin to see the process of argumentation with the least amount of interference, okay, meaning I'm not adding my words to anything here. The most I do is an arrow. And we let the text tell us what it says. That's the beauty of it. The Torah and the Mishnah and the Gemara will teach you about itself. That's a remarkable statement. My Rosh Hashiva, Rob Goldstein, he should be well and healthy. He said, let the Torah teach you about itself. Let the Gemara teach you about itself. So if we look at the text itself, it will begin to tell us about itself. For instance, here we found by the fact that the Gemara says we can understand that Tana uses the 4 that comes to miyut, we see that that's already a principle, right? And we explained why, because of we can't, anything that's obvious doesn't have to be said, so there must be some import to that, so we say a number always comes to eliminate. So here was the original, the Gemara said, Bishleim, I can understand that it has to eliminate Rav Osher, eliminate the cases of Rav Chia, but Rav Chia is the end of the line. He has 24. What did he come to eliminate, right? So the Gemara says, he did not want to talk about these 2 cases, Moser and Mafagel. Moser is when a person turns his friend in, Rahmanis, to the government. He said, it says this guy stole some, not stole some, he cheated on his taxes, or so that's called a Moser. And Mafagel is when the Kohen makes a mistake in offering someone's korban. Okay? Now the person's going to, his korban didn't work, he didn't get the kapara, so now he's got to get another korban, so he damaged his prosperity. So those 2 cases were the cases, that's why Rav Osher said 24 to eliminate those cases. Okay. So the Gemara says, well, wait a minute. Velisne, how come he eliminated those? Because the Gemara before this went to an in-depth analysis of why Rav Osher and Rav Chia didn't talk about the 4, and they eliminated the people before them. So now, if he's going to eliminate these 2 cases, he's not going to talk about them. Well, why doesn't he talk about them? They are clearly forms of damage. So the Gemara says, "Velisne, let him indeed include them." So the Gemara answers, "Bishlema mafagel bekutchim lo kamaire." Okay, we understand why he didn't talk about mafagel. Mafagel is a case of kutchim, is a case of the Kohen not doing his service properly and causing a damage to the person offering, bringing up the korban. So he was only talking about civil damage. Okay, he didn't want to talk about spiritual damage, at least korban damage, I shouldn't say. But what about Moser? Moser is a case of civil damage, right? It's handing someone to the government, causing them a loss. My time lo tani, why didn't he teach it? That's a kasha. So now there's a teretz. Shani Moser, the dibura, it ubi dibura lo kamaire. Moser is a question of using your mouth to hurt somebody. All the other cases, you have to use your body, or your animal has to use. It has to be physical damage. But here, all you did, or even a korban, I mean, you brought it the wrong way. Okay, you thought about the wrong things, but Moser is a question of just by your mouth, by one's mouth, putting going to the government, getting this guy arrested. So he didn't want to talk about that level. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, Vaho Motzi Shemra, he does talk about Motzi Shemra, that's also just the mouth, right? Motzi Shemra, the husband just goes to the court and says, this woman that I married was not a virgin like she was supposed to do. So you can't say that Rav Osher is not talking about damage done with the mouth. So the Gemara says, that case is different because yes, please.
So Motzi Shemra is one of the it's on the list of Rabbi Chia. It's one
sure.
Of
Let's look at
I don't remember the list. It's one of his.
Yeah. Let's pop up the list.
It's okay. You don't have to show it. Yeah. Okay.
There we go. Here it is, right here. You see number 1?
I see. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That answer is not sufficient, right? Right. So they say, well, it is sufficient because that's the bibur de ismais. That's although he uses his mouth, it's connected with an activity that he did. He lived with his wife, and they found out she was not, or he claims, unjustly, that she's not a virgin. So there's an activity that he did. It's not pure words like Moser. Moser is a pure action. There was no physical action done by the damager. It was just he went to the government, he opened up his mouth, blah, blah, blah. But here, there was an action that was done, and that was, as a result of that action, then he went to the court. So that's why Motzi Shemra, he did include because it was it wasn't pure speech. It was speech that was connected to an act. So the Gemara asks, wait a minute, what about Edom Zomim then? Edom Zomim is where false witnesses come and say Mr. A stole something from Mr. B, and he never stole it. That they only used his mouth. So they say, Edom Zomim dibor deleis be maisa. Who ukatani? And wait a minute, if we look at our list, there it is, number 18, you see, Edom Zomim. Now, it has not associated with it. And he taught it, so your answer is insufficient. Okay? Edom Zomim dibor deleis be maisa hu ani. It doesn't have taught it. So we have a distinction. Hosom afal gav deleis be maisa rachmakori be maisa. Even though the act of Edom Zomim doesn't have an action associated with it, it's a pure act, but the Kodesh Baruch Hu used the word maisa when an action when he talked about it. The kasiv vasitem lo kasher zamam lasot lachiv. You shall do to these lying witnesses as they planned to do to their brothers. So because the Torah used the word osei, so then Rev Oshia put it in. Now again, we're only handling the basic structure here, okay? I'm not getting down into any deeper levels that you have to, one has to understand. This is very, every discussion here is like an Einsteinian formula. Until you start thinking about things and reading, everything looks very simple. As they say, everything is simple to the simple. So we're going to keep it simple, but there always has to be a word of caution that says what's going on here in each one of these steps is very deep. But that being as it may, we'll go on. Bishlema Latana Didan. So look at this concept of visual logic. Okay, we started off with, and when you read the books that we read, we'll develop a common language. I want to use the language, but here we started off with a inference. Okay, since our Tana used the number, that number, we have a rule, comes to mamaya, it comes to eliminate. So we said we can understand bishlema, we can understand our Tana why he used the number. Meaning, using a number is problematic, right? I mean, we can all count, as we said. So he used the number because he didn't want to include the cases of Rev Oshia. And Oshia used his number because he didn't want to include the cases of Rev Chia. Ella, and here's Akasha, I didn't read, Yana the Rev Chia lemiyute why, but there is no one after Rev Chia. Why did he use the number? So the Gemara answers, there are two cases that he didn't want to talk about. It was Moser and Mafagel. Okay, so we had a kasha that there's no miyut, it seems, in the number of Rev Chia, and we had a teretz. Okay, now we're going to now attack this teretz, right? We're going to say, but wait a minute. You have to show me, if these are the two cases he's not talking about, you now have to show me why he didn't write them. It's not good enough you tell me that he left these out. You have to explain why. So we say, velisne, let him put it in. Doesn't seem to be any reason why he should have left them out if these are true. In other words, attacking this teretz. This answer is now under attack. Let him put it in. So the Gemara now preempts. In other words, it says we can understand why Mafagel is not in. That really is not our main focus because it comes from Kutchim. So he didn't want to talk about Kutchim. He wanted to talk about civil damage. He didn't want to talk about spiritual damage. But Moser is not Kutchim. Why didn't he put it in? So we answered that Moser is a question of words, and he was talking about actions that do damage and not words. Right? So that was the teretz we described why he left out Mafagel. That wasn't hard to do, says the Gemara, because that's talking about Kachim, and we want about Kachim. We want about civil damage, not about spiritual damage. But wait, Moser, why did he leave that out? So the Gemara answered, because Moser is different than all the other 26 that he talked about, because this is just Dibur. And he didn't want to talk about damage done through the mouth. Now we attack. Notice I just indented this question. And we said we're going to attack this teretz. We say, wait a minute. If that's the reason why he thought Moser, because it was Dibura, then he should have also left that Motzi Shemra, because that's also Dibura, right? So the Gemara answers, no. There's a difference between Moser and Motzi Shemra, because Motzi Shemra is something that he did do. He lived with his wife. He then went to the Beis Din and claimed that she was not a virgin. Okay? Whereas Moser, he didn't do any action. It was not associated with any action. Now, we have a general rule, by the way, which is when faced with a contradiction, make a distinction. Okay? So what we're seeing here is that the kashas are forcing us to refine our understanding of what Rev Chia is doing. Okay? And we're seeing how only through these difficulties, we're seeing his yardstick for including or not including things. So here, Dibura is under attack. Your answer was, well, he left out Moser because it's just words. But he put in Motzi Shemra, that's also words. So we're forced then to make another distinction, and that is a essential difference between Motzi Shemra and Moser, because Motzi Shemra comes as a result of his action. Okay, so we said, but wait a minute. If that's true, that he didn't want to talk about, pure talk like Moser, because that's pure, it has no action associated with it. Well, and how come he wrote Edom Zomamim? You see, now I indent this because this is a kasha on this teretz, and this is a kasha on this teretz, okay? That's why it's indented. I added numbers, but that's just, and arrows, just for making things even clearer. But the point being that this answer generated this kasha, and this difficulty, and this answer generated this difficulty. Okay, so we said Edom is a case. So we said Motzi Shemra has a ma'isa. Wait a minute, that's not an answer. Why? Because Edom Zamamim also did a ma'isa, right? And he just lied about what Mr. X did. He didn't do any action. He just lied. And you told me pure language is not included in Rev Chia's categorization. So it sure is, because Edom Zomim is pure language, and it is there. So here we mitaretz, we answer. So the reason why he put it in is because the Kodesh Baruch Hu in the Chumash talks about it in the terms of a mice, and here's the pasuk. It says, "Vasisem kasher zomam lasos," what they tried to do. So since the Torah gave it the name of an action, Rev Chia also put it in his list. Okay, so there's, as we break it down, and we don't do anything here except indent. I just add colors in red and blues. And now I use green, by the way. It's an old way of doing things. I use red and green. Show Akasha and Teretz. Yes, please.
Can I have a couple of questions. Can I?
I'm all ears.
Some of them might be premature, but I think I have three. Okay, I have three questions. I think my first question is, when when a person approaches this argument, are they supposed to know beforehand that Rabbi Chia has? Are they supposed to know his 24 categories?
100%.
In other words, they are supposed to know them, yeah?
Because right before this text, you see, I took this out of context.
Yeah.
Right before this text, we explained the reasons why Rev Chia didn't include what was in our Mishnah. Okay? So that's the context. We brought the Gemara brought the text of Rev Chia in their entirety, and then started an analysis. Why did he pick these, and why didn't he pick? Why does Atana pick these, and why doesn't Rev Rav Oshi picked the ones of the Tana, and why does Rav Chia? Okay. At the end
So
of that
before
discussion, then the Gemara has this inference of the numbers. Okay. Yes. Next question.
So my next, so before the Bishlama, I know I'm asking the same question twice now. Before the first Bishlama, it gives you the list of 13 and 24 and so on, yeah?
Correct.
Okay. My second question is this now, what you've gone through, this step by step, is this a complete thought? In other words, it's Bishlama sets up a question, and then by the end of that, we're finished with that question. We've answered the question. And now the next Bishlama number 2 moves on to another question.
The question, no, they're not. They're interrelated. That's why you invented them. They are
interrelated.
Yes, because each question forces the next question. The answer that you give to each question is the foundation of the next question. It's.
Here's my last question.
Yes.
Yeah. Is the purpose of that whole this very similar thing that happens in Plato. I mean, this is because it's logic. Plato calls it division, definition by division. I think it's in the Protagoras or one of these dialogues where he says in order to define you have to keep dividing and to specify more and more. Now what's interesting, I mean, it's by the end of that process it's not clear what exactly the point of it was. It could be one of two things. Either it was to elaborate through the process of division, you become more and more, you specify more and more clearly what the entire position of either Reb Oshia, in this case Reb Chia, is, or is it simply to answer the Bishlama? Like, did we go through the whole process of division and subdivision just to answer why Tana Didan has only 4? Because that's what sets off the question. Why does he have only 4? Oh, because he has 13. Why does he have 13? Because he has 24. So by the end of the process, we go, oh, now we know why the Tana Didan has only 4. Is that the purpose of it? Or is it to actually elaborate all of the position of Reb Chia?
The answer is the second one. Yes, 100%. 100%.
But so then the original question then becomes a bit of an artifice. You know what I mean? It's almost like an excuse to explain Reb Chia's position. We come up artificially with the question of why does Tana Didan have only 4?
No. Each one of these levels, again, what we're trying to do is unpack or decompress the information. The first rule in Darkei Gemara is to be medakdek on lashon, to be very exacting on the text. It's only through being exacting on every word of the text that we can understand the depth of the message. If I can give an analogy, E equals MC squared. Okay, E equals MC squared. But there's 4 terms there, right? E equals MC squared. Okay, let's say 5 terms with the squared. That 5-term equation took pages of, let's say, a blackboard space. What you see is just a conclusion, but the mathematics behind that takes blackboards over blackboards. So what you're seeing when you're analyzing a text, be it the Chumash, the Mishnah, or the Gemara, is the tip of an iceberg. You're seeing the upper level of the argument. Only when you delve into these subtle differences do you begin to understand the deeper message that's encoded in these words. That's my whole point here. In other words, when you simply look, you said there's the form, which is, hey, they have a question, they give an answer. I have a question, give an answer. That's all. That's the surface level of what's going on. What's really going on is the second thing you said, which is we are trying to understand definitions here. And the way we're trying to understand the definitions is through a careful analysis of the text. Now, this is mystical. Why do I say mystical? Because normally language is not done this way. I mean, especially nowadays where we have what I call the democratization of language, where every Joe Yokel can write on a blog anything he wants to say. That means words have lost their deep meaning. But the people that we're dealing with, use their words to express very, very, in French, my friend told me there's a word called dense. We have the word dense too in English, but it means that the words are filled with meaning. And not meaning, as I said, through association, like looking at a painting and getting your understanding of it. There's an exact meaning being broadcast with the words. And when I say it's mystical, how information can be written in such a careful manner so that the word Av written in one context and in another context opens up a deeper meaning of the text you're dealing with. To me, that's a mystical experience. How they do it, it's Masara and Ruach HaKodesh. But that's what's happening here. We're doing this analysis not simply to ask questions and to say, oh, why did he say this? And I said to you, well, you have a contradiction, give a conclusion, and well, that's very nice. No, we're trying to penetrate the depth of his message. And that's why I also said before, a word of caution. Don't think that this brief analysis is the end-all of this discussion. There's a deep discussion encoded and embedded in these words. So we're going to take the next little text, okay, and just give an example to it, okay? So again, I hope I answered you. There's the surface level, and that's how some people learn, especially people learning Daf Yomi. He asked the question, he gave an answer. He asked the question, he gave an answer. Yeah, that's the question, he gave. That's the surface level. That's for beginners. Rev Yeshua Cohen, who I told you has gone over Shas numerous times, says that every time he goes over a sugi again, he gets a new insight. There's powerful, powerful information encoded here. And we're not talking about, imagine this in context of all of Shas. If your head held out like he does, what does that mean, you see? And that's really what Tosfos does. He doesn't see just what's in front of him and his life experience. He sees all of Shas, and he sees the network of interrelationships, the web, so to speak, of nodes and links. You see, that's a tremendous, tremendous, deep view of what's going on here. But we can't get to it until, and that's the whole idea, we go through surface levels of understanding until we get to the depth of the message. That's the way it goes. The Vilna Gaon stayed on one problem. For 40 years he had problems in his head. Yes, please.
No, I like what you're saying a lot. I mean, it basically, it means that the question really serves a different purpose. The question, it's not the way that, you know, we prosaically ask a question and want an answer. The question is really a tool for the purpose of some articulation. Like what needs to happen here is an articulation of something into parts. And so the question is just the occasion that allows for that articulation to take place.
And the person that wrote the text embedded the question in the text. That's the amazing thing. It's not the person wrote unconsciously, and we're now trying to say, why did Shakespeare say this word in Hamlet and this word in who knows what, Othello, who knows what. We're not inventing questions. The person who wrote these texts embedded flags for the student to open up analysis and open up the real message of what he's saying. That's the amazing, amazing thing. That's why I showed you the example. I mean, look at this text. Well, we're going to see. Let's see what it says here, and then I'll show you what's going on here. That's my whole purpose here. But anyway, here I just show you by it. When you enter a text, you first have to be a good scientist. You know, they say in computer language, garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
Your understanding is only good as your information that you're getting. If you're not exacting on what you're reading, then your ideas are going to be dreams and fallacious. So you have to start with a careful analysis of what's being said. From what's being said, then we can go on to import and to those other deep levels. But the first thing has to be a clear understanding of what is the structure of what's being said. That's our beginning position, but it's not the end. Let's look at the second question. Okay? This is the next question in the Gemara. We can understand why our Tana took the word, placed the word Av. Again, the word, remember it said Ar Av es Nazikin, it said Yeshua Bo Mav Neheva. To say the word Av, that there's Avot, again embeds a message. There's no father without a child. So by choosing the word avos nezikin, the Tana is broadcasting a message, raising a flag to say, now I want to tell you something. These avos have toldos. They're not just simple flat cases, which you'll find in one case and nowhere else. These cases will give birth to a whole set of other cases. So we can understand why our Tana used the word av, because we said that these cases that he spoke about, the shore, bore, mom, and the hever, they all have derivatives. So we said the shore that gores has derivatives of biting and kicking and squatting on another animal. That's a derivative because it's not written in the Torah. But once we understand the principle, that principle will, through analogy, show us that these cases also are included in that law. But when it comes to Russia, the word avos, miklal de ikatoldos, told the sayam I knew. By using the word av and saying that there's 13 or 24, they're saying that all these are all called avos. They all have derivatives, and they don't. The only ones that do it are 4 of the list. So here comes along Rebbe Avuhu, and he says, Kulam kit avos. The reason why they use the word av to demonstrate, to talk about the other 9 or 24 minus 4, 20 or 19, however you want to count, the other 13, I believe. The reason why they used the word av was to, again, encode the message that all of these are like the original 4, but in a different sense. Not in the sense that they have told us, because it's obvious that they don't. Their message is they all have the law that if the damager, in their cases, wants to pay with land, he has to pay with the best. My timer, how do you know it? What's the reason? Look at these words. We know it because Asya, it comes from this spread to all the other cases from the Arba Avos, comes from the words Tachas Nesina Yishalem Kesef. End of Gemara. Tachas.
That's the end?
That's the end of the Gemara.
That's one complete thought.
That's it. That's it. If you want to know the reason why these are like avos to pay meitav, it's because of tachas nasin l'shalom kesef. That has to be explained, and this is the explanation by Rabbeinu Hananel. Can you believe it? 4 words.
I want to see the.
You can. I should have brought you Rabbeinu Hananel, but again, I'm only trying. This is quote unquote overview, believe it or not. But again, the whole intent here is to show the encoding, the embedded of information. Now you're supposed to take that information, look at the Chumash, and recognize all these cases written in the Chumash, and to see how this din of Meitav spreads to all the cases in the Chumash through Shalem, Achas, Kesev, and Nesina. And all that's encoded. We're not talking about dreams of interpretation. If I could only emphasize that. If I read Shakespeare, if I look at a painting, I could write books on it and everybody's happy because that's my take on it, as they say in slang, right? That's my feelings, my understanding. This is what I see in it. We're not interested in what you feel about things. We're interested about what is the information being broadcast. And the people who are writing in a very compact, compressed way. So if you look at Rabbeinu Hananel, and again, I only do it here to make it visually clear, he explains all those pasukim. Now we're going to also, our work, this is again, introduction. I'm using this as a demonstration lesson to show the depth of the Torah. And I'm going to take you, Be'ezus Hashem, through each one of those levels we talked about. We're going to look at the Pesukim. We're going to analyze the Pesukim. From the Pesukim, we're going to go to the Mishnah. From the Mishnah, we're going to go to the Gemara. Okay, and we're going to see each one of those steps and how everything is concluded in the Pesukim themselves. And once you're there, like you said, you hear, that's it. That's hearing Har Sinai.
Can I ask you, if we go back to the Gemara text there?
No problem. Let's go back to it, please.
Yeah.
Right here, yes.
Now this everything I see on the page here, this is called what, a sugya or a?
This is called a sugya.
What would you call it? It's one sugya.
Yeah.
It's a complete thought. So it seems like I mean, this is what I get out of it. You tell me where I go wrong, please. It seems the whole point of it is to articulate Rabbi Chia's position, I guess because it's the maximum position, because he articulates 24 different types of Nezikin here, right? And so the way to articulate that is, first of all, to pose the problem of, wait a minute, why is Tana Didan limiting it to 4? And then we get, okay, so we have 24, and we're excluding 2 possibilities that would have brought us up to 26. And so that gives us that defines very clearly what Reb Chia's 24 are. And then the second question tells us why he's justified in using the word of, even though it's not properly speaking a logical category. So the whole thing is an articulation of Reb Chia's position.
Okay, now I must correct you, because this question of Bishlema goes not only on Reb Chia, but also Rav Oshia. Okay, because Rav Oshia also, in his analysis, oops, I'm sorry. Rav Oshia also said that there was 13 avos, and these the Shomer Chinam, the Shoel, they have no toldos too. So this question is equally addressed to both Rav Oshia and Rav Chia. Right.
Which is both of them. I mean, Rav Chia is just the more interesting one because he has a maximum position.
Exactly. He's the maximum.
Now the Tana Didan, he would not. For him, the word av is not, let's say, equivocal. In other words, it means strictly a logical category, and that's it. And Rav Oshia and Rav Chia, they say actually it's an equivocal term. It could mean a logical category, but it could also entail a Gzera Shava.
Okay. Can I, since you brought up that question, you gravitate toward the deeper message, I see. Baruch Hashem. Okay. Let me make the following comment. Everybody knows that the word av could be equivocal. Words have primary meanings and secondary meanings, okay? When you use a word, we first presume that it's meant in its primary meaning. If I show you that it cannot be used in its primary meaning, or it's not being used in its primary meaning, then we have to look for a secondary meaning of the use. Are you with me? So everybody knows that words have primary and secondary meanings, but our first confrontation with a text is to demand the primary use. When it says Hashem put his hand in Mitzrayim, we say Hashem has a hand. Now, prove to me not so. Okay, so we say, okay, because we have lo guf, that's a basic tenet of faith. I mean, that's what you have to understand, the basic rules. But it's not written there. It's a metaphor. So when the peshat, or the simple meaning of the word, cannot be, like Hashem does not have a hand, so then we have to look at, so why did he use hand when he spoke about the interaction with the Mitzrayim and putting in the plagues? So we said a hand represents power, personal intervention, however we're going to design it. But the point is, we always start with what it means. What it says is what it means. When it can't mean what it says, then we look for a secondary use. So again, our Tana we have no problem with, and that's why the Gemara says, Bishlema Tana Didan. What does the Gemara say here? Bishlema Tana Didan. We have no problem with the word avos in our Mishnah because it's being used in its primary sense. Now, even then, we can get involved technically, which I'm not, just on the side. That's also called a borrowed term. because we're not talking about a father and babies. We're using the concept of a father and babies to express a logical concept. So we also borrowed the term. But okay, we're going to learn about those things more. If we learn all those Ramchal books, we'll be learning those things better. Okay, but anyway, that doesn't matter. But our Tana is using the word av in its primary sense, its logical sense, meaning that it has derivatives. Okay, because they're not using it in its primary sense, we know that they're broadcasting a message to us. Now, what is the message? So the message is that the avos, all the cases they bring, have this extension of meitav to this gezer shav of tachas shalom kesef. So did I answer you? It's not everybody understands what primary meanings are and secondary. We demand primary meanings. If we see a primary use of a word, we have no problems with it. When we see a word that's not using it in a primary sense, it's a flag for us to say, uh-oh, the Tana is broadcasting a message here. He's telling us something. Let's hear it. This is what he's telling us.
Each one of the, I'm just a memory lapse here. Each one of Rebbe Chia's 24 categories are avos. In other words, they themselves have toldos.
Let's be very clear about this, okay? That's why I have these charts here. The only one of the that have toldos are the first. And that's how Rev Oshu starts off with the first four and Rev Chia is the first four. That's the only ones that have toldos. That's why it makes a lot of sense. When he said Arba Avos, it has toldos. He used the word %. They, when they extended it, got the word Av. They should have said there's 13 Nezikin. That's all, not Avos.
Yeah.
So they were broadcasting a message.
Right, so it's sui. Punishment is so important. It's so important to take the consequences into consideration that we should really call them avos. But I guess it's what it's that Latin phrase sui generis, which is a very it's sui generis is really a bit of a joke. It's a contradiction in terms, because generis means avos. It literally generis means genus, like species and genus, right?
Mm-hmm.
So generis is a general category, but sui means itself. So sui generis means it's a category unto itself. In other words, it's a category without derivatives.
That's a contradiction in terms.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. But that's exactly what Reb Moshe and Reb Chi are adding. What they're calling avois is really sui generis categories, right? Because they don't have toldos.
So since they started off with these four, right, they're using the word av in its primary sense. When they add these, they're using with sui generis terms. You have to make up your mind. If you're talking about it in the prime sense, we can understand it. But if you're talking about it in a secondary sense, then drop the word av. The word av is like you made up a term called sui generis, but that doesn't mean anything. You don't have to tell me that, you tell me that something is, as you said, it's an oxymoron, it's a contradiction. You don't tell me something is a category and it's not a category. What are you trying to tell me? What are you trying to tell me? There could be something that's a categorical term that you tell me, this is a categorical term, but it's not used in that sense. Okay, you can say something like that. Anyway, the point here is that through the misuse of the word, these Tanas are broadcasting the message of Tachas Asini Shalom Kesef, which is an incredible understanding. And I emphasize, we're not dreaming and we're not inventing things out of the air. We're just understanding what they're trying to say. When they wrote these words and used that word, they were doing it, they consciously placed that word because here they wanted to teach us another concept of Tachas Shalom Kesef. It's gewaltig. I mean, it's unbelievable. Okay, let's see where we're holding here. Okay.
Can I?
Yes.
I don't know how you're doing. I think I'm. Can we call it?
Yeah, we're going to call it quits for today. Okay, the next level.
I don't quits. I don't want to use that word quits. I mean, that's not the right word.
Let's call it timeout. Okay, now I understand. There's a lot to absorb here. The next level we're going to, I'll just tell you where we're going to go. The next level we're going to do is this analysis of the Rishonim, and which is actually what we did. I'm sorry here. I'm sorry. That's what we did right now. I actually just went ahead of it. Okay. Next, I'm going to introduce this meta language that the Ramchal talks about, and we're going to see. We're going to start giving labels to things, which will help us doing this visual logic. Okay. That'll be what you'll have to remind me. We left off here because I teach another class also. I get confused the way we did. But we're going to take a text, the Gemara text. We're going to add this meta language here of the Ramchal, which will add to the visual logic a language of exactly what's going on. Okay, and we keep going down and down and down and down and down. Okay, and that's going to be that's the whole purpose here. The whole purpose here is to show the method how we're going to open up the deep meaning behind these words that were written by Chachamim and who encoded all this information, which is quite remarkable. When you think about it, right? Scientists, when they discover a rule, right? What do you mean he discovered the rule? Did he make the rule up? Did he make the rule up? Did he invent? Is he inventing reality or describing reality?
This is a hard question for philosophy. I teach philosophy of science. And this is a deep question that's debated.
Okay, well, I would be so bold to say that he's just describing the reality. He's discovering what he's just again letting reality tell him about himself. Now he could have the wrong message and project on reality, but he really wants to do is say, let's look at reality and let's have it talk to us. What is when an object falls, can we make a formula that will represent all objects? So embedded in reality are all these rules. And who put them there? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You see? If they weren't there, no one, I don't think, would be bold enough to say he's creating reality. No. The matter that they're looking at is doing what it's doing.
Can I say something? To stick to the image of the zip file.
Yes.
A zip file not only contains the data in compressed form, but it also contains the logarithm that allows for the unpacking of that data, right?
Yes.
So my question is, by that analogy, and I'm not saying that the analogy has to hold, but by that analogy, it would suggest that the Torah not only contains everything in compressed form, but also in a clear pasuk, which would have to be deraiser, not the Rabbanon, it would give us the logarithm.
It's not so simple because it's Torah Shel Peh.
Right. So this is the thing. So what I'm saying. So that means that at that point the analogy breaks down. It would mean that the logarithm of the zip file is not in the zip file itself.
Right.
It's imported, or not imported. I mean, it's brought in. I mean, I have no problem with it.
Not a question of problem. It's just a question.
And Moshe Rabbeinu is my Rebbe. There's no question of it. But I'm just thinking. Sometimes when I have to explain this to students, and they say, well, you see, the rabbis imposed these rules. I mean, it should have all been there in the Torah.
Well, it is there. If you notice, that when you learn, they will demonstrate that the Kal Vachomer is in the Torah. You see, Moshe Rabbeinu makes a Kal Vachomer, with Miriam. So they'll show you the source of these rules.
Aha, so that's what I'm asking. So there is a source.
But the source, but let me be clear about it. It's a case, and that case demonstrates the source.
Okay, that's
well, when you throw an object up in the air and you start measuring it, and then you come up to the law of gravity, you see. So that means in matter there is encoded a law, and you have to understand where it is and how. So it's the same thing. I mean, the Torah does tell you about its laws, but I've just said you have to be careful, because you need a Torah Shabbat Peh also. I mean, the Shloshis Midos and things like that. You have to know, it's not, the text does tell you about it. So we're going to have fun things together to do. I mean, don't think that we just, don't think we use the text of the Chumash. We want to start analyzing it, you see. We're going to have the Chumash talk to us. We're not going to do anything. Again, we're just going to use my tab key and my enter key, and that's it. Maybe we'll add a couple of numbers for fun. But as far as the text, we're going to let the text talk to us, you see. And as the text talks to us, we're going to get beautiful, beautiful messages out of the text, and by doing nothing but just listening. And then we're going to see how the Mishnah is going to teach us more and more information that's encoded in the text, okay? We'll do things, this is a spreadsheet we're going to use for the text, you see. I'm going to turn the text into, a formula, you see, in 1 second. We'll show you the formulas. Then we're going to analyze the text. You'll say, oh, this group of cases, well, how come they're, that's interesting. All these cases are cases of Misa, you see, up to here. And then all of a sudden, it switches from death penalty to, the landscape. So we're going to have to be careful. We're going to go as far as we can. Good scientists, we're going to look at the text as far as we can. After we've gone as far as we can, then we're going to see the Mishnah open up the text for us, okay, and show us keys that we never would have dreamt about, you see, like Tachas Nesina Yeshalom Kesef. There's no way in 1,000 years that you would come up with that, you just can't, because the word Yeshalem is this cluster of cases. You know what I mean? Here's the word Yeshalem over here. You know what I mean? Here's the word Tachas over here. You're telling me that. So what I'm trying to explain is that we're going to look at the text and have it talk to us, but we have to understand that there's rules that were handed down external to the text also that's going to import and help us in the message. And that's it. That's Torah Bechtav, Torah Shabbat Peh. They're one unit. You can't understand the text without the algorithms. You can't. I mean, you can go a certain amount. You can go so far, but you can't get the total message. That's why we need Torah Shabbat Peh. Okay, so we have a lot to look forward to. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. It's
Okay.
great. I love this.
Okay. You should have
Thank
a
you so
bracha
much.
hatzlacha. I'm putting this on also, even though I'm sort of overlapping material because I'm doing the same introduction for two different people, but I think it's very important the question you're asking, that opens up new dimensions. So we'll be putting both types of introductions on. Okay. Have a great week, and it's a pleasure, and we'll meet you next week.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Cool.
Okay, sehr gesund. Ja.